Coming up on the FSR Sarc Fighter podcast, another reason for hope as Xentria works to develop a new drug to fight sarcoidosis.
We truly believe in it, and we're putting the work in to try to make it happen.
In this episode of the FSR Sarc Fighter podcast, Xentria leaders join me to talk about their new drug, XTMAB-16.
So Noopur is actually, I'm going to steal Noopur's analogy, but I sort of think of it almost as a rugby scrum, where the cells sort of clump into one place. And if something doesn't actually act as a referee and interrupt that process, that scrum continues to go and attack that area of the body. And if it's not interrupted, then you have basically a place of scar tissue or fibrosis.
It's all coming up on the FSR Sarc Fighter podcast.
This is the Sarc Fighter podcast, living with sarcoidosis and other rare diseases. Here's your host, John Carlin.
Hello and welcome. This is episode 116 of the FSR Sarc Fighter podcast. I'm your host, John Carlin. Xentria Incorporated is partnering with the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research for the XTMAB-16 study. XTMAB-16 is a tumor necrosis factor, better known as TNF inhibitor, that aims to target the inflammatory response known to occur in patients living with sarcoidosis. And the purpose of the study is to measure the safety, tolerability, and potential effectiveness of XTMAB-16 in participants with pulmonary sarcoidosis with or without other organ manifestations. If you want to learn more about this research, there's a link in the show notes, and of course we'll have much more about this as it is the topic of today's podcast. Before we get to that, just a gentle reminder that I do this podcast because I want you to understand the sea in which you swim. Maybe I've said that before, I don't know. But if you've got sarcoidosis and you jump in and you're over your head and now you've come to the surface and you're floundering around and you're trying to figure out what's going on with you. What do I have? I never heard of this thing before. How do I deal with it? What's the environment like? What is the support community like? What are my options in terms of medications? Am I feeling what other people are feeling? Are there even any other people who are feeling like I am or going through what I'm going through? And the answer to all of those questions is yes. There's a massive support system through the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. There are lots of other patients out there who are dealing with different manifestations of the disease. And also there are some people like our guests today who are doing a lot to try and help find a cure for this unpredictable disease. So this podcast is here to help you figure out what that sea looks like and what direction to start swimming, and knowing what's regular, what's not regular, what's good, what's bad, and maybe where that horizon is, or the shore is, if you're using my swimming analogy. So that's what we are here to do. That's what I'm here to do on this podcast, of course, with the wonderful support of the foundation. And today I have for you a big dose of hope. I'll be joined by Noopur Singh. She's the Vice President of Marketing and Patient Affairs at Xentria, and Tom Matthews is the Vice President for Clinical Development at Xentria. And they will be talking about this drug that I mentioned a moment ago. It's currently in clinical trials, and it's called XTMAB-16. They'll be telling us how it works in the body, how promising it seems to be so far as a new therapy for sarcoidosis. Of course, they're going through all the steps to look at its efficacy, of course, safety, side effects, all the things that have to be studied if you want to get an idea from concept all the way to market. And so now they are in the clinical trial phase, and they are enlisting patients for the clinical trial. And they and I basically, we're all hoping that perhaps some of you who are listening may be candidates, or maybe you know somebody who could be a candidate who might want to participate in this clinical trial. And I can tell you that Xentria is bending over backwards to make it as easy as possible for people who qualify to participate in this, whether you need daycare, whether you need reimbursement for your travel. I mean, all these different types of things. They are literally looking at everything, trying to make this something that's very easy, palatable, and something that you would want to participate in if you meet all the criteria. Now, as you know, if you listen to the podcast, there are no drugs, right, that have been developed for sarcoidosis, which means that everything that we take for our disease is off-label, whether it's Remicade or whatever it is. I mean, the only thing I guess that's on label is prednisone, and we all know how we all feel about prednisone, but pretty much everything else that's out there is something that was developed to fight something else, and by trial and error, some physicians have figured out that, wow, that actually helps with sarcoidosis, so let's give it a shot, and they make the arguments, and lots of times they can get the insurance company to approve it, but a lot of times it's a hassle. I take Humira, and it's always a hassle. On the other hand, it works. It's got me under control. So, and I've heard the same thing from lots of patients with respect to lots of other different therapies. So, but if we had a drug or a series of drugs that were developed just for sarcoidosis, think how much easier that would be, and presumably how much more effective it would be, because they were developed just to fight the disease. So today we do have the opportunity to learn more about the latest candidate. So before the interview today, let me just say I hope you're enjoying the podcast. I think this is the voice of sarcoidosis, and it would help me make the podcast more effective if you take that link from today's show and send it out there on your social media. If you've got sarcoidosis related social media, if you've got a group of people, or if, your church, whatever it is. And some folks who've been on the show have really redoubled their efforts with respect to that. And it does show up in terms of the number of downloads. So whatever you can do to help grow the show, it helps me, it helps FSR, it helps you. So please do whatever you can to let people know about the podcast and that you think it's a good one, okay? Coming up, Noopur Singh and Tom Matthews from Xentria.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the Sarc Fighter podcast. You may be wondering, what can I do to help? How can I be a part of the sarcoidosis solution? It's simple. Make a donation to KISS, Kick In to Stop Sarcoidosis. 100% of the money goes to the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. Look for a link in the show notes of the Sarc Fighter podcast. Welcome back to the FSR Sarc Fighter podcast. Well, we have a great interview and discussion today. We're talking about another new drug that could be in the quiver for doctors to treat our sarcoidosis. That drug is called XTMAB-16, and it is being put together by Xentria, and they are in the very early stages of trying to get this drug approved. It's in the testing process, if you were. And so joining me now is Noopur Singh. She's the Vice President of Marketing and Patient Affairs, and Tom Matthews, who's the Vice President for Clinical Development. And guys, before we even get started with the questions and everything, why don't you each introduce yourselves and give us a little of your background? Noopur, you want to go first?
Sure. So thank you for having us. I'm so excited, been a longtime listener, longtime fan. So my name's Noopur Singh, and I joined the company Xentria in 2020, which is when it was founded. Prior to Xentria, I've always been in the research space and always been in the rare disease research space. So I joined, I was in the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, but prior to that, did work in cystic fibrosis, and then hemophilia. So always been very interested in seeing how different stakeholders all contribute to drug development in these different spaces. And so I've been happy to be able to stay in Sarc research with the community, but now on the industry side of things.
Right. And you and I go back to your time at FSR. So
We sure do.
we've known each other for quite a while. And Tom, would you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah. Hey, John. Thanks for having me on the podcast. It's an honor. I've also been with the company for about 4 years. My background is pretty much always been in pulmonary medicine. So I trained as a respiratory therapist early in my career and then went back to school for a graduate degree and then started working in research. I worked with Noopur in the cystic fibrosis space a long time ago, and then joined industry working in emphysema, and then was presented with this opportunity to work at Xentria to develop the drug for sarcoidosis. So I remember taking care of patients with sarcoidosis back when I was working in the hospital, and it was an intriguing project. So I'm really happy to have been working on it for the past 4.5 years.
All right. Well, I am really excited to hear more about this drug and its potential and to kind of explain it to people, have you guys explain it to people so they can see how this works and whether it can be a reality because there's just so few options for those of us with sarcoidosis. So, Noopur, I want to go back to you just quickly because Xentria I didn't realize that Xentria was such a new company, relatively speaking. So how did that all come to pass?
Yeah, so the company was really built around this lead asset, XTMAB-16. We have a partner company, Mihal, which is in Chicago as well. But, Xentria owning this asset was really focused on studying it in sarcoidosis patients, not studying it in a lot of different pulmonary indications. But XTMAB-16 sort of became Xentria's backbone in terms of how we approach drug development. And we have a portfolio outside of this for potential co-development partnerships and then doing some biosimilar clinical trials. But really with XTMAB-16, it's become the blueprint of how Xentria sort of applies our business model to drug development. With the different hurdles of rare disease drug development, it's been a learning experience for us, but really is one of the pillars that Xentria stands on. So founded in 2020, and we're based here in Chicago. But we do have a virtual team with core members in the city.
Wow. Well, that's interesting. So somebody said, wow, here's an idea. Here is a potential drug, which is XTMAB-16. Let's have a company so we can see how it works. I would have thought you have the company and then you found the drug. Well, this kind of went the other way around.
I would say it's testament or speaks to sort of the commitment to the KOLs like Dr. Boffman, where they knew sort of the potential mechanism and the potential benefit for this patient population. And so there was really early buy-in, but also just early enthusiasm, which was enough for a company to take a risk. And it is, it's a lot, but
yeah, gotta have all those investors, and because I know it takes tens of millions, if not in the hundreds of millions of dollars to try and do this. So that's a lot of risk by a lot of people.
Definitely. And it sort of shows our commitment where you can't do this if, you might not believe. We truly believe in it, and we're putting the work in to try to make it happen.
Yeah. Dr. Boffman? Which Dr. Boffman is that?
Dr. Bob Boffman.
Yeah, from the University of Cincinnati, formerly. So he was kind of like the guy when I was diagnosed. My doctor called him to try and figure out how to treat me because it was so rare, right?
Right.
So he was one of the people that kind of saw this early on.
Definitely. He's, of course, the great connector, but also he has run past trials, including large infliximab trials, which you'll learn about sort of how that relates to our drug. But, he's been a huge proponent of just getting treatment options to patients and seeing what he can do, who he can speak to make things happen. And so back in 2018, he reached out to our president, Tom Shea, we have a lot of Toms at our company.
Yeah.
But yes, he's been a huge guiding force for us since the beginning.
All right. So let's I want to give Tom a chance to talk a little bit more about the drug itself. So Tom, I'm just doing this for listeners if they might be listening the first time, they don't understand what sarcoidosis is, but your body has this AWOL immune response where it's attacking something in your body that doesn't need to be attacked, and in so doing actually does damage. So the white blood cells and the T cells and all that stuff, they come rushing into a heart valve because they think there's something wrong with it, or something in the lungs, since you guys are talking pulmonary primarily. And we need a way to make the body stop doing that. And so I am assuming that XTMAB-16 has shown some promise in that. Can you talk about the mechanism of how this all works?
Yeah, that's a great way to describe the process. And so what we know about sarcoidosis is that your body overexpresses something called TNF-alpha, which stands for tumor necrosis factor alpha, which basically signals the body to send those attack cells to a certain place. So Noopur is actually, I'm going to steal Noopur's analogy, but I sort of think of it almost as a rugby scrum, where the cells sort of clump into one place. And if something doesn't actually act as a referee and interrupt that process, that scrum continues to go and attack that area of the body. And if it's not interrupted, then you have basically a place of scar tissue or fibrosis. And if you fell as a child or you have a scar on your forehead or something, that scar never goes away. So what we hope that XTMAB-16 will act as the referee in that process, interrupt the formation of those cell clumpings or granulomas, and then prevent any chronic disease. So we developed XTMAB-16 as a TNF inhibitor. So it's not a new concept. There's a lot of TNF inhibitors that exist, like Humira would be an example of probably the most famous drug, infliximab, et cetera. And so we knew that people were using TNF inhibitors off-label, meaning that none of these drugs were approved for sarcoidosis, but they were being used in the space. And so the company that we were working with at the time developed the structure of XTMAB-16 to be very similar to infliximab, which is being used a lot off-label for sarcoidosis, although it's not approved. And so Noopur alluded to the fact that Dr. Boffman had run large clinical trial back in 2006 was when that data was published, but it never led to approval. So patients who need TNF inhibitors often have to get them through a very long and arduous process where their doctor has to submit prior authorizations or some justification for you to get a TNF inhibitor. And also those drugs were never developed with a dose or frequency that was appropriate for sarcoidosis patients. They basically just took the drug and the dose that was used for other diseases and applied it to sarcoidosis. So what we're trying to do in this space is to take everything we know about TNF inhibitors in the space, but apply a new drug concept lens to it. So we're doing a full drug development path with phase 1, 2, and 3, so that at the end of this, we can have a drug that's specific for sarcoidosis patients at a dose and frequency that works for them. And we've applied this in a lot of different data-driven exercises, not only in the clinical trial, but in the lab with some of our research partners, for example, Dr. Elliot Krauser at the Ohio State University, and looked at how this drug affects granuloma formation. So we're really excited to apply our learnings from that, all of the history of TNF inhibitors in this space, but really doing a full drug development exercise. So right now we're currently in a phase 2 trial, which I can talk more about.
Yeah, so well, let's do that. What is the current phase of the trial? I mean, so it's shown some promise, obviously, or you wouldn't all be here. It's not just it's like, wow, if we did this, it ought to work, but you've actually done some early testing on it. So where are you with it?
Yeah, so we're currently in phase 2. So for your listeners, generally to get a drug approved, you go through phase 1, 2, 3, and sometimes you have to do a phase 4 after your drug gets approved to collect more data. So we're right in the middle of it. Most drugs fail at phase 2, which is really scary. So what we tried to do is take a lot of that risk away. And like I mentioned, worked with some of our research partners to develop really strong proof of concept and mechanism data so that we could apply that to our phase 2 trial. And so right now, the trial is basically being done in two parts. So it's an overly complicated design, but I'll try and explain it. So we have part A and part B. And so part A is what we're trying to find the dose and frequency that we want to move into other phases of the trial. So we're enrolling 32 participants in the trial, and 3 of the patients will get the drug, 1 patient will get placebo, and we'll look at them for 12 weeks, and we'll see what dose and frequency is correct for them, but also make sure that the drug is safe and effective for the patient population before we start to move forward into a larger trial. So that's enrolling currently in the US, in the UK, and then we hope to open this trial in some countries in the EU in September. Once we have data from the first part of the study, we'll move into the second part of the study, which we call part B. That's a larger group of patients, so 64 patients. And we start to just test different things to see what helps patients and what can be deemed effective. So how their steroids are reduced, what their quality of life measurements are, how it affects different biomarkers or different lab tests in your blood that show that it affects that inflammatory process. And so I mentioned a lot of drugs fail in phase 2. So how we tried to apply a risk mitigation to that was to look at how the drug was affecting that granuloma formation, that rugby scrum in the lab. And so Dr. Krauser at The Ohio State has developed a way to mimic granuloma formation in a blood sample, basically. And so what we did was apply our drug at different dose levels. So the doses that we were going to be testing in phase 2, and we wanted to see how that affect the overall area of the granuloma, so the size of the granuloma. And what we saw was that as we introduced larger doses of the drug, the granuloma size reduced in a perfect curve. And we were really excited about that, and we wanted to see how that was related to steroid use too. So we also introduced steroids at a sort of dose that patients would be at normally, around 10 milligrams, and then a super high dose, which is something like equivalent to 100 milligrams. And what we saw was that granuloma reduced, as you'd expect with corticosteroids, but we saw that our drug also reduced the granuloma in a way that was greater than corticosteroids or equivalent to a large dose of corticosteroids. So that's how we took the concept of steroid reduction into our clinical trials and how we designed the doses and frequencies that we would study in phase 2 to see how this actually works in the body, because we know there's a lot of other variables that can affect this. So that is where we're at right now.
Wow, that's a great way. That referee in the scrum is a great way to look at it. So,
well, I stole it from Noopur, so
yeah.
I can't take credit.
I think I took that from Dr. Krauser, so
Okay.
just
All
trying
right.
to keep it moving forward but it's a great
Boy, it really makes sense when you do that. Dr. Krauser has been on this podcast, by the way, so I just love how things are going full circle here. So this would be essentially a steroid-sparing drug, right?
That's what we hope. Yes. So
Yeah.
patients that are going to be enrolling in the trial have to be on a certain level of steroids and also a certain level of second-line therapy like methotrexate. And we want to test how steroids are reduced over time in the trial, in both parts of the trial.
Man, I've been there for all of those drugs, so I can speak from experience. So are there potential side effects that you're looking for that, or you can predict, or that you hope won't happen?
So this is not a new concept. It is a new drug, but it's not a new concept. So TNF inhibitors have been approved for over 20 years, and they're used safe and effectively both in the hospital setting and at home. This drug is being administered by an infusion, so it's an IV that's given over 2 hours over the supervision of a healthcare provider. And so what we're looking for is really any new side effects which could develop, but also we've set up a safety database where we're looking at established side effects for TNF inhibitors to make sure that we're developing a safety profile that either meets or exceeds what's currently approved. We've done a phase 1 trial. Most phase 1 trials are done in healthy volunteers, and that's what our trial was done in. We tested 2 dose levels in 36 healthy participants in 2021 at a clinic in Baltimore, and we were very positive with the safety profile we came out of that trial. And so we applied all of the learnings from that to our phase 2 trial, and this trial is also being monitored by an independent data safety management board. So that's something that's applied in drug development when you really want to have an independent body look at what's safe outside of the company, so that we're making the right decisions, and that decision is coming from a third party. So we have a lot of scientific experts, medical experts, and statisticians on that board that help us make decisions in terms of safety, so that we move very slowly, deliberately, and making safe decisions for the patients.
Yeah, absolutely. So what would make XTMAB-16 different from, say, infliximab or something like that?
Yeah, so as I alluded to before, there's never been really any full drug development process applied to TNF inhibitors in this space. So a lot of the things that are published have been one study, a couple of studies, or have been a retrospective analysis where they look back at patients. So there's been really no prospective research of TNF inhibitors in a full drug development program ever before. So that's really what's different about XTMAB-16, is that we're looking at a full drug development program, and we're developing it with a dose and frequency that's specific for sarcoidosis patients. So that's the differentiator. What's same about infliximab is really how it was developed structurally. And so it is a biologic medication. So some medications are chemical medications, some are biologics. Biologics are made from cells and expressing cells, so it's a living organism. And so we developed it with different cell expression systems and some things that we hope will make a safer drug in the end and make it have less infusion site reactions and better tolerability, but we can't claim that until we prove that in our clinical trials. So as we talked about safety, all of those things we're looking at as we go slowly through the phase 2 trial will help us inform if our assumptions on using those different structural differences to help make those differences clinically.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah, that all makes sense. So it's a drug that's being developed specifically for sarcoidosis, and there's only a very few drugs ever that have been attempted in this space, and none completely successfully yet. So you're very much a pioneer in this effort.
Yeah, and we're blessed to be working with some amazing people that are doing the same thing. And there's a lot of investment in the space right now with other companies that are doing the same thing. And we're lucky to be their colleagues and friends and co-pioneers in this. So it's a very exciting time to be part of this whole thing happening in sarcoidosis right now.
Yeah, so you're in the Canastota wagons headed west. You're pioneers.
Yeah, very bumpy journey,
right.
but we'll get there eventually.
So Noopur, who are you looking for? Who's eligible for this?
Yeah, so for this trial, primarily we're looking at patients who have pulmonary sarcoidosis. And then outside of that, you can have ocular or cutaneous sarc. For patients, we do require that they be diagnosed with pulmonary sarcoidosis for at least 6 months. But then we're also looking for patients to be on a dose of steroids, as well as that background therapy that Tom was talking about. So steroids, that dose is between 7.5 and 25 milligrams per day. And then that second line therapy, like a methotrexate per se, being on a background therapy like that for at least around 3 months. To what Tom was sort of outlining, we have a part A and then a part B. And so that part A of the trial, we do require that patients be infliximab naive, so I've never taken infliximab specifically before, just because of the safety of this the nature of this phase of study. But then for that part B, that criteria opens up a little bit. And so previous infliximab use is allowed. We just have a washout period or sort of requirement in there for part B. All
right. And so you're looking in the United States and the UK currently, and then maybe into the greater space of Europe?
Yes. So we have a global trial with about 38 sites. So US and UK are up and running, and EU will be up and running shortly. And so we'll have sort of all hands on deck.
All right. And if somebody's listening right now in those areas, and you've got how many, 30, how many sites?
About 38.
38 sites. So how would somebody know where those sites are and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so there's a couple places that patients can go. One, you can go to Xentria.com and go to the phase 2 sort of tab. It'll list out or give you a link to the clinicaltrials.gov webpage, which lists out all of the sites. You can get to that webpage sort of a few different ways. You can go directly to clinicaltrials.gov. You can go through Xentria's website, or we've partnered with the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, so you can go to FSR's clinical trial page and they'll connect you to those postings. And then on that trial page, if you select locations, it'll list the sites that are active, but in case, the site that you're seen at or the university that you're seen at isn't listed, there is an email address that's listed there, so patients can email and sort of express interest if they want to. Another thing that we also have on Xentria's website is what we're calling a pre-screener. And so it is a form that patients will consent to provide their information on. It's not a screening form necessarily. We call it a pre-screening form, but just to get some basic parameters to see high level if patients are eligible. But we understand it's a difficult criteria, and patients are really interested and eager to learn. But we have a few different landing pages and then a few different ways of outreach so they can at least connect with someone to learn more.
Mm-hmm. And why pulmonary? I mean, is it just because that's what everybody has?
That is a great question.
Right?
It is not, unfortunately, that simple. Just like, oh, let's just choose it because everyone has that and one drug will fix all of it. We definitely know how the disease is highly variable within each patient. It doesn't affect every patient the same way, but, in a way that where the FDA and the EMA, when they require trials to be designed, they require a really controlled environment, regardless if it's a rare disease or not. And so for a disease like Sarc, for us as sponsors, when we're designing a trial, we have to take a few things into account. And so one, it's, what does our drug do, or what do we think that it does? Two, how can that drug, or how do we think that drug will apply itself to different organs, and different, the quality of life assessments or like the clinical assessments. But then three, how can we build a trial and set it up for success? And so I guess it is since pulmonary is sort of that largest bucket, that's why the first step in leads with pulmonary, but it leads to the highest chance of success for a drug like ours. That being said, all that data that we're collecting is sort of that stepping stone to build into getting into other organs or build towards that data collection for other organs to make it so it's not just so restricted to pulmonary. But with the nature of these phase 1s or phase 2s like we're in, safety is a primary concern. We don't have a lot of patients in our part A. It's a 32 patient cohort. And so we really just need to be, unfortunately for us, also selective in just that patient profile that we select so we can have the cleanest data or the best data for that. That has to be a strong building block to get to that next phase of trial, where that next phase, we hope we can then open up the eligibility parameters a little bit. It might not be beyond pulmonary, but that's sort of usually why you're seeing a lot of the other industry community members coming in and starting with pulmonary. But we do understand, especially with the historical use of anti-TNFs, that there's a potential for other organ involvement and patients with different profiles to potentially benefit from this, but we just sort of have to wait and see and collect that data.
Because it doesn't seem to matter with the off-label drugs where your sarcoidosis is. If you have it, you take methotrexate, or infliximab or whatever, Humira. But you're going to target pulmonary and then continue after that to look at effectiveness and other. But you did say also ocular, eyes, and skin manifestations.
Correct. Yeah, and so we hope to see some. We're looking at a host of sort of tests or assessments. So blood work, like Tom mentioned, but also quality of life parameters. Even if you have pulmonary, if you just feel better in your daily life, if you can walk a little bit further, if you can go up steps without, I guess, feeling out of breath, but still just an overall physical fatigue, we're monitoring those as well. And so just as much data that we can collect to help broaden the scope of the indication is our goal.
Okay, gotcha. So I've heard on several occasions that it is just hard to get sarcoidosis patients enrolled in studies, just in general. What is that? What do you anticipate? What hurdles do you have to get over?
Yeah, I think for us, it is that we understand that the criteria we have made is very selective. And what that means is that patients need to be in a very sort of specific part of their disease state, their condition or level of inflammation. And then on top of that, they have to be in a specific part of their treatment regimen. So, that steroid dose, the duration, same with that second line therapy, if it's methotrexate, that duration, stability. And so it really is just finding that patient at the right time, at the right place. That takes a lot of coordination. It's clinic visits. It's the principal investigators or the site, doing chart reviews. And then it's also for the patient, it is a huge burden and commitment. They might be fully eligible, but then the amount of visits that you have to do for our study, it could be too much. To collect the data, it takes a long time. Some of the earlier visits can be close to a day. So to get time off, we understand that those are all very valid constraints. And so for us, we've tried to make as many resources available for support in terms of course, reimbursement for visits, but working on a case-by-case basis for daycare, overnight stays. We will completely, cover travel and hotel stays, but it's really just working to see if the patient is interested, what we can do to support. But we do think that enrollment will be challenging, just given that it's a rare disease, with a very variable profile. But I think that being said, we've had so much support and buy-in from the community that the principal investigators at the sites are enthusiastic. And I think with the work that you're doing, sort of the constant dialogue has helped with patients just better understanding what a trial is. And so patients, if they want to advocate for themselves to be involved or just hearing about it, we've had a really, I would say, healthy discussion, but also a healthy level of involvement for a rare disease state, enrolling trials, where it's not just ours. And so it's been good, and we're a part of a good community. So the dialogue keeps going, but recruitment is always top of mind.
Yeah, and then you've got to have people who are willing to maybe drive a couple hours. Is that typically from a medical center that's offering this? Is 2 hours, 3 hours? Is there sort of a circle that you draw around the medical center and say, this is probably where the population is going to come from?
Yeah, definitely. The centers have their own clinics and their own patients, but then also partnering with the FSR to do sort of geo-targeted outreach. So exactly what you said, where we do like that 50-mile perimeter and sort of do outreach from their database of patients who have consented to be reached out to by them, just to increase awareness. But that travel becomes difficult. So that, but I think it's something that Sarc patients have always had to deal with. If you live in a more rural area, to go get to a Sarc specialist, it's often just another journey.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned that we did a podcast not too long ago with FSR where we were talking about the challenges for people to go. Let's say they meet all your criteria. Now it's down to them. Can I go on that Wednesday to that appointment when I have to worry about things like daycare? Or one person was talking about pet care. It's like, well, I got no one to watch my dog. I'm going to be gone for 10 hours. So you guys are doing everything you can at Xentria to try and handle people with those expenses, those types of considerations.
Definitely. I don't have a pet, but Tom has a pet. We all have lives outside of work. And so, yes, we have those parameters set up that the site staff will contact, work with us and our CRO or sort of our extension who's running the on the groundwork to see what's available. If those are things that are prohibiting a patient from committing.
Sometimes they're taking care of an elderly parent or something like that. So sometimes it's just not easy for people.
Yeah, it's a lot of commitment,
Sure.
On top of sort of understanding the risk benefit ratio of being in a clinical trial, there's a lot of things to consider.
Yeah. So if somebody is interested, then they go to your website. Is that the first best place to go?
Yeah, our website, and then from there you can link to the pre-screener right at the top. You don't need to scroll down. The pre-screener is one button, and then there's an additional details button that will link you to clinicaltrials.gov. And so that can be sort of that one-stop shop to get more information.
All right. And Tom, what is your hope for the future? How excited are you about this, the prospects for this drug?
I have a ton of hope for the future, not only for this drug, but for the space in general. Like, it's really a blessing to work in sarcoidosis for a ton of reasons. But I think one thing that struck me when I first got into the space was the development of treatment guidelines. And so every 5 years or something, there's a group of physicians who get together. They read all the papers that are released in sarcoidosis, and they make treatment guidelines decisions that help guide how a patient with sarcoidosis is treated. And unfortunately, in the past, there has just not been enough high quality prospective research in the space that has allowed them to make really strong decisions on how the treatment guidelines are developed. And so the thing that gives me the biggest hope is there are a lot of companies like our company and aTyr and Kinevant that have invested in this space and are going to be reading out prospective, high quality, randomized controlled trial data that will help hopefully influence treatment guidelines for patients, not only for our drug or somebody else's drug, but just how patients are treated. And so there's a ton of data that's going to be collected and help inform how the patient journey is done. And the second thing is the biggest blessing is working with the amazing people in the space. So we talked about Dr. Boffman, but our lead investigator is Dr. Obi at East Carolina University. She's an incredible scientist and physician and advocate
I know
for
her as well.
sarcoidosis
Yep.
patients. She's
Yep.
amazing. And
Great.
we've done work with Dr. Krauser and Mark Judson and our own medical lead, Keith Robinson. They're just the most kindest, welcoming people in the space, and they want everyone to contribute. So it's really a blessing to be involved with that, and then to see the new and up and coming investigators and scientists that are investing their careers in sarcoidosis. So Michelle Sharp, who's at Hopkins, Logan Harper at Cleveland Clinic, they're really amazing people that are investing their resources into NIH research for sarcoidosis. So it's just a really exciting thing that gives me a ton of hope for the future.
Now, we do have quite a nice little sarcoidosis community, don't we?
They're the
It's
best. They're really the
unusual.
best.
Unmatched, yeah.
Yeah.
Really unmatched.
All right. So we are recording. Sometimes people go back and listen to back episodes. So we're recording here on June 17th of 2024. So from this date forward, when do you guys anticipate having some results that will tell you whether you go on or not?
We're hoping to finish the first part of the study by the end of this year. So we're making some solid gains in recruitment, always a challenge. And so I really enjoyed listening to the dialogue with you and Noopur and talking about barriers to trials and things like that. So I would encourage any patient that's interested in the trial to really have that dialogue with their physicians and be upfront about what their barriers are to care, because there are people working behind the scenes that can help remove those barriers. So anything that we can do to support that is key, because we want to get this trial done as quickly as possible and move forward and make sure that this drug is available for patients one day.
All right, very good. Anything else you want to add, Noopur?
I think I'll just express my gratitude again. I think it's great to be involved in this community. Anything that we can do to also just contribute to the science and the research, moving forward, it provides us with a lot of drive, you could say, and purpose. But I think the Sarc community is it's so strong, it's unmatched, but I think there's just a greater chance of success as a collective. And so, all brains, all parties working together. But it's definitely a hopeful future for the space.
Great. Thank you guys so much for joining me on the FSR Sarc Fighter podcast.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
Thanks to Noopur and Tom again for joining me today. This is exciting news for the sarcoidosis community. Of course, I'll keep you posted on any additional developments as the results of these studies become clearer, but let's hope that XTMAB-16 breaks through and gives us an option to treat our sarcoidosis by keeping those granulomas from forming. And did you hear that? Did you hear the analogy? I love this, about this drug being sort of a referee at a rugby scrum. Keeps order in our bodies. The body's immune response wants to go haywire, and a drug like this, a TNF inhibitor, comes in and it says, whoa, 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 guys, no, not so fast, not over there. That's not what we want you to do. And I just think that's a great way to look at what's going on here. So this is really good stuff, and I'm so happy to be able to share it with you. And don't forget, there's a link in the show notes if you'd like to participate in this trial. And I believe it was Noopur who also said that you can go to the Xentria website, and you can also go to the FSR website as well, and you'll see more information about this. Okay? Good luck. Let me know. And again, I'll let you know if I get updates from the team at Xentria. Meanwhile, the official Sarc Fighter song is Zombie by Mark Steyer and his band, the White Hot Lizards. Mark's story, the story behind the lyrics, is in episode 12. And I want to let you know, he reached out to me lately, just recently, and he's not doing great. He's had some flares and some episodes, and he would like to come back on the podcast and talk about that. And we're working to find a date for him to do that. But that song Zombie, he's really just singing our song, folks. And if you ever listen to the lyrics, you'll know what I'm talking about. So thanks again to Mark for coming up with the song. The podcast is released every other Monday. As I'm speaking today, yes, my trusty dog Dougal, my boxer, is curled up on the chair in my office. Dougal makes my life so much better. The backstory to the founding for the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research is episode 11 with Andrea and Redding Wilson. Please follow Sarc Fighter on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Peloton, and I have a cycling blog, the Carlin the Cyclist, and there's a section there called Cycling with Sarcoidosis. Also, if you're new here, you want to figure out what Sarc is, go back and find episode 2 with Dr. Simon Hart. My story is episode 1, and I'm hearing that some of these episodes, the older ones, are disappearing from the podcast apps, but if you go to Podbean, all one word, that's where this show is hosted, and all of the episodes are there, and they do have their own app. So if you just download the Podbean app, then search for Sarc Fighter, and you will find all of these episodes, okay? In the meantime, please send me an email. Let me know what you think of the show, or if you'd like to appear on the show, or if you've got an update or a thought, I'd love to hear it. carlinagency@gmail.com, and there's a link in the show notes. Until next time, keep fighting.
It would be so much easier to grieve if I had a breath to breathe. I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling. Learn to suffer, you feel pain someday. Learn endurance, your strength will fade away. trying to keep up the pace. Dead man walking, counting down his days. And I don't know what will come. Look for silver linings, but still I find none. There was potential, slipping gone. It feels too fragile, but I'm holding on. I'm holding on. I'm holding on to fear I fight every single night. Whoa, I'm still upright. Find a way to try and adapt your life. It's not the why, but the how that plagues my mind. A new perspective, appreciate what you've got. With dead men walking, in an instant it could be gone. And I don't know what will come. Look for silver linings, but still I find none. There was potential, slipping gone. It feels too fragile, but I'm holding on. I'm holding on. I'm holding on to fear I fight every single night. Whoa, I'm still upright. Wherever there is happiness, fight to be there too. And wherever there are friendly smiles, try hard to smile too. And wherever there is sunshine, don't let fear darken you. And whatever happens, please remember right now belongs to you. Whoa, oh, 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 oh. suffer, you feel pain someday, and learn endurance, your strength will fade away. Dead man walking, trying to keep up the pace. Dead man walking,